Welcome back. If you've been with me through series 1, you already know that something shifted in you. I know because you told me. The hundreds of comments, in the messages, in the emails, you said things like, I cannot unsee this now. And you said, I always knew the body was more than the textbooks suggested, but I didn't have the language. Things like, I feel like I've been given something back that I didn't know I'd lost. That's exactly what sacred geometry does. It doesn't add information. It restores recognition. For me, it animates confirmation. So before we go any further, thank you. Genuinely, I thank you. What you brought to that series, your curiosity, your willingness to sit around the fire with ideas that don't resolve quickly, and your patience with complexity that somehow earns its keep, is what made it what it was. Now we're beginning a new series on this theme. So in series 1 of Sacred Geometry, it was all about the shapes, the 5 shapes to be precise, the 5 Platonic solids that are usually attributed to the ancient Greeks, who identified them as the only perfectly regular volumes that nature produces. There are, in fact, carved stone balls found in Neolithic Scotland dating to around 3000 to 2000 BCE that are considered to be the earliest physical evidence of these shapes. And in his book, Time Stands Still, Keith Critchlow identified all 5 polyhedra represented in those carved spheres, along with intricate combinations of them, suggesting the designers from 5,000 years ago actually understood and excelled at 3-dimensional spherical geometry. Now, these stone models predate Plato by roughly 1,000 years, and they're kept to this day in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, in England. Now, Critchlow also considers that they honour the elemental codes of nature. Those codes are in a process of time and timing in our bodies, encoded into our own self-organising architecture. Michael Schneider calls them nature's original patents or patents, and we are essentially the microcosmos of the cosmos, working out how the nature of us and as the macrocosm actually does it in real life, in ordinary ways, as you, as me, them, and all of us, as one. Our current research in so-called human biomechanics is essentially, mostly, in the wrong field of physics. It relies on hard matter physics, such as traditional architecture of upright buildings, to explain our living human uprightness, and it then assumes that inaccurate foundation for all that follows. Now, Gerald Pollack, famous for his work on the 4th phase of water, which will come in another series, states brilliantly in the first chapter of his book Cells, Gels and the Engines of Life that, and I quote, although the persistent notion of an earth-centered universe may gratify our collective egos, Galileo showed that it was the sun that held this honour. With the sun at the solar system's centre, orbital paths no longer required complex epicycles. They became a lot simpler. What had earlier seemed a reasonable hypothesis, supported by seemingly indisputable visual observation, turned out to be dead wrong. A complicated paradigm was replaced by a simpler one. Now remember, Galileo was placed under house arrest for upholding Copernicus' original theory that we are in a heliocentric, sun-centered universe, not a geocentric one. His crime was heresy. And heresy or no, Galileo challenged centuries of inaccurate complexity and replaced it with accurate simplicity that applied to all the celestial bodies. All this storytelling is based on the irrefutable fact that you are round, and so is every aspect of everything your miraculous body incorporates as a body on a planet, as one of the celestial bodies. Get it? You really can take my word for it, and it really is a profound waste of energy proving anything about the human form that abides by the laws of hard matter physics. It just isn't humanly possible. And what baffles me is the energy wasted on adhering to such an utterly ridiculous and obvious failure to recognise what you and I and all of us live in. A round body moving around over the ground, ground, the place where gravity force, G-force, meets and equalises ground reaction force through the tubes, pockets and pouches of the rounded body. It's so simple, we sound like Muppets saying it. However, if you want to look at the sacred geometry you're made of thoughtfully, you'll need to return to the simplest principles at the basics, such as drawing a circle. We will later do a series on drawing these shapes because the physical act of doing that has a very special resonance to it. You feel it, something extraordinary happens, but we'll get to that in the future. Right now, a circle of any size, literally any size, is the 2D version of the most universal round thing you will ever know. A sphere. Always, every circle in every iteration, when you divide the circumference by the diameter, you end up with the same infinite number. Always, in all ways. All is one. Let's be clear about that. Every single round thing has a moment of circularness that abides by precisely that mathematics in 2D. That includes your cells. You already know that. That perhaps explains many of your wonderful messages. Anyway, back to our episode to introduce the series. In the first series, we moved through the elemental aspect of sacred geometry at its clearest foundation, based on the 5 Platonic solids or volumes, the shapes that link to the elements of fire, earth, water, air, and ether, respectively. And we found the geometry of those shapes always based in roundnesses, always. We will dive deeper in another series into our embryology, into our architecture, into the fascia, into the cell, into the breath, into the essential ground of sacred geometry of the living body. It is so everywhere, posh scientific term, ubiquitous, that we struggle to see it. It's even a bit like trying to look at our own eyeballs. We can't. So we reflect and reflect on these shapes to find our way. Stay with me. It really is worth it. Collect the odd gems as we go and build them into your own treasure. It really is worth knowing. And here's why. It's a bit like it's worth knowing what you're really seeing when you look up at the night sky. You might at first just see a million dots of light with no order, no sense, no organisation, just a sort of random pile of lights twinkling in the dark. Pretty but meaningless. Then someone points out that some are different sizes and they don't sparkle so much. They kind of seem to hold their light, and you learn that those are planets, not stars. And then you learn that there are patterns in those stars. You spot Orion's belt and why Neptune and Venus shine with different qualities. And then you discover that the ancient wisdom we're all relying on to know what we think we know is courtesy of the ancient philosophers who fought the culture of their time to tell the truth about the celestial bodies, without which we don't exist. Please don't let yourself imagine for a moment that your incredible body is any different, any less mysterious, or that it can be crammed into a formula that explains its form, especially not in hard matter physics. You animate you in a very unique way, and we're going to go into this at the very first sort of junior level of inquiry to point to some of the patterns that reside in the matter of being us. We're not flat-pack kitchens that get assembled at right angles and bolted together at our joints with first, second and third class levers. Seriously? In anything but a biomechanical conference with the Borelli Award Committee, you'd be laughed out of the room for suggesting any such thing, because it's nonsense. We're made of matter that has patterns, non-linear biologic patterns of living forms that do not follow the laws of hard matter physics, because that's not how we self-organise, period. And it goes deeper into our language. pattern comes from the word pater. Matter comes from the word mater. And we are the result, regardless of which member of the human race we're referring to. Every single one of us is the result of a mater and a pater, combining somehow to form a unique expression, a third form of that combination. They could do that a dozen times, and every single time the result is unique. That's just what's true. Now, interestingly, from perhaps a more spiritual point of view, the Lord's Prayer in its original language of Aramaic begins with the word Abun. It means Father, Mother, God, or Father, Mother, Divine. It is why in archetypal work, the archetypes of numbers give us a different mathematics. 1 and 2, according to Schneider, are the parents of all numbers. They come after 0, which those of you who travelled through Series 1 with me will remember we touched on at the very beginning of that journey, and which deserves its own deeper exploration in time. Check out episode 0 of Series 1. But the key is this. 3 is the firstborn. It's a number that represents the firstborn, the third element, the combination that arises from 1 and 2, which aren't really considered numbers. The Holy Trinity, the first whole-born result of the Father-Mother giving rise to the divine. You are divine. Hu means divine in Sanskrit. Humankind means divine mankind. Womb plus man equals woman. Together, man and woman create divine child. You animate that geometry. You already are the code. You are the third force arising from the first 2, nested in the fourth. Why? Because 0 is first and every digit is held by the next dimension or placement. So the 5th holds the 4th, the 4th holds the 3rd, and so on down. None of this is religiosity or poetry. It is mathematically considered sacred. And that's partly why it's called sacred geometry. We do not form in hard matter and end up with rigid shapes in isolation from the planet we live on, breathing the element of air. We move through them as our sign of life, expressed in motion. We wake up to the inner constellation when we treat it as sacred to us, when we treat ourselves with the respect and wonder and awe that we might see in the night sky when it begins to reveal its unknowable vast nature. And that nature is through the lens of a code, and we are working with some of the keys that that code unlocks. You are the secret. But we'll get to that. But in the last series, we ended with Metatron's cube and the extraordinary fact that all 5 of those volumes, in 2D at least, can appear to nest inside it simultaneously. The code, as I called it, was complete in one sense. That is the significance of geometry. Gaia metria, geometry, Gaia metria. The patterns of nature herself are reflected in the outer cosmos and the inner cosmos. The questions worth asking are how? What difference does it make? And why do I need to know? They're great questions. And we're going to inquire into some of the more brilliant minds in history that at least asked those questions with a degree of curiosity. And they found out crucial elements that can help us find the magic in all of this mystery. They can point us towards elements of our own inner cosmos in new ways. This series 2 is about people. It's about people who cracked some of the code of our inner constellations. Some of them are unknown. All of them have an exquisite influence on how well we honour this beautiful geometry that we call a body. Not with rules and regulations and ridiculous fitness regimes and principles, mostly based on erroneous biomechanical ideas that don't make sense, but with genuine respect for the nature of ourselves written as it is in each of our unique constellations. We don't want to crack the code. We want to so quietly learn to reveal it and maybe read it and ultimately enjoy it as us, each one of us. Are you with me? Here is something I would love for you to understand. These geometric principles were not discovered by accident, or by committee, or by consensus. They weren't a policy that someone agreed to and then had a lot of social media behind them to gain popularity and the latest memes. It didn't work like that. They were revealed through ancient wisdom and years and decades, even aeons, of studying the cycles of nature slowly, breathing in present time, passing on wisdom through generations. They were seen. Sometimes they were recognized. And someone thought to ask a new question about them. Each of those questions asked by a specific human being at a specific moment after often working against the grain of everything their field believed. Some of them were artists, some were architects, some were biologists. One of them is a clinical anatomist and exercise physiologist who spent decades at the dissection table and who is currently writing a book with me. These are the people this series honours. It's a series that brings us front and centre to the connection between the sequence of the stars and the sequence from birth of a living being. And let's just clarify, the iron in your bloodstream that is essential to your ability to be alive comes from one source and one source only in this universe, and that is a dying star. We, you, they, all are quite literally made of stardust. We all breathe air. We share the gaseous exchanges with every living thing on this planet, past and present. We are in a reciprocal breathing relationship with every tree and shrub. And they also have no levers in their nonlinear biologic forms, ever. Essentially, there is relentless continuity, connectedness, and communication among so many elemental aspects of us in nature and all that makes sense of it. And the little word we have to make sense of for all of it in living forms is tensegrity. And I want to begin, however, by being clear about something. There is a broader conversation in this field, a wider landscape of researchers and theorists who've contributed to the understanding of what tensegrity means in living bodies. I know many of them, most of them. I've worked alongside several of them, and I've learned from that work. This series follows a very specific thread. It follows the people whose contributions, in my view and in my experience over several decades, most directly illuminate the living fascial matrix, the sacred nature of the living body, and most usefully serve the practitioners and movers who make up this community. If it can't be translated into practice, it's just more theory. My work and the work of my co-founder in Myofascial Magic in Action, Paul, and my colleagues in anatomy and physiology are all about how does this help me move better? That is literally our theme song. So this work espouses and expands on those genuinely contributing to the individual practitioners in the world who truly want to transform this knowledge into something your mum and dad and your kids can handle, regardless of age and stage of fitness. How does it help them move better? So that overall is a considered editorial choice, not an omission. Every series has a scope, and this is ours. So let me introduce you to the people we'll spend this particular series with, beginning with 5 or 6 of those whose stories form the spine of what follows. We begin this second series with Leonardo da Vinci. That's not because he understood tensegrity as such. He couldn't have. The word didn't exist and the science was 4 centuries away. But we begin with him because he looked at the human body and saw living architecture. He saw the inherent geometry Leonardo, with his brilliant, mystical, artist's eye, saw what the artists around him were too close to their own assumptions to notice. He saw the architecture of the body and he captured it in motion. He was actually the first to draw the spine as S-shaped rather than reduced to a straight column. He saw the living form as a volume in space, not a collection of parts with some kind of arbitrary explanation for how they work together mechanically. He could design machines, and he knew at a soul level that they were not the source of knowledge to understand the living body. They were the result of it, the extrapolation of what that body could learn or could teach us if only we had the means to understand it. We create machines, not the other way round. And that seeing matters because it's where this story begins. From Leonardo, we'll take a leap in time and move to Kenneth Snelson. Snelson was a sculptor, a student of Buckminster Fuller in the late 1940s, and he's the man who built what he called his early X-piece. X as in a cross, a floating compression structure in which rigid elements are held together and apart simultaneously by continuous tension. He demonstrated for the first time what appears to be a simple physical object as something that nature had actually been doing all along. His story is exquisite, especially if you can see the wider picture of his artistic awareness and his generosity of spirit. I had the privilege of speaking to him in his New York studio in 2016, shortly before he died. He was kind, precise, generous, and quietly insistent that the floating elements and the sea of tension in which they reside were never to be seen as separated or separable. That conversation stayed with me in my heart, and it will stay with you too. Don't miss that episode. Then we will consider Buckminster Fuller, who appreciated Snelson's insight deeply. In fact, deeply enough to name it Tensegrity, which is called a portmanteau of words from tensional integrity or tensile integrity. Fuller already understood geodesic geometry, the way round things organise in 60-degree triangulations rather than 90-degree compression angles. That's what's required of stacked hard matter like houses or an apartment block. He recognised in Snelson's sculpture a principle that actually applied everywhere in nature, from domes to cells to the body itself, from jellyfish to elephants, from proteins to people. And the naming of a thing such as that is not a small act. When you give something a name, you give people a way to look for it. And Fuller gave us the word, and in a way the world's never quite recovered, because Fuller, like everyone here, gave us far more than a word. However, we're threading a theme here, so we will, like all storytellers, thread that theme into a tapestry about tensegrity that might make it feel important to you. Because you embody it anyway, you may as well expand your understanding of what's already in you. That makes far more sense than anything based in hard matter physics, because round things are soft matter physics. Anyway, from Fuller we'll travel to Donald Ingber, and this is where the science becomes embedded and undeniable in decades of peer-reviewed research at the cellular level. Ingber is a biologist at Harvard, and in 1998, over 25 years ago, he published a paper in Scientific American called The Architecture of Life, which remains one of the most important pieces of scientific writing in the field of living human structure. It provides such essential keys to how we move that it remains remarkably one of the least known works among movement practitioners. That's something this series intends to change. What Ingber showed through decades of rigorous cellular research is that tensegrity is not a metaphor for how the body works. It is in fact the absolute foundation of the mechanism, if we have to use that word, or functioning of everything in the human body. Notwithstanding my personal loathing of the word mechanics related to human motion, Ingber demonstrated under laboratory conditions and the highest scientific scrutiny how individual cells use tensegrity architecture to maintain their shape, to sense mechanical forces and transmission, and to translate those forces into biochemical signals. This is so crucial. He discovered and explained how force transmission, in other words, how the livingness of life force moves as us, works as the means of communication internally. The geometry goes all the way down, all the way up, all the way in, and all the way out, to the cell, to the molecule. It's not poetic, it's structural. It's also crucial, because without it, we cannot move, we cannot live, we cannot be. And then we close this series with Tom Flemons and then John Sharkey, chosen for the synthesis of the protagonists we've mentioned that they each represent. Tom Flemons built physical models of tensegrity structures that showed how the principle operates not just in spheres, but in tubes, spirals, and the complex geometries of the living spine and limb. He translated the tensegrity principles into forms that make sense of how the body holds itself up in space. And you'll see a model from his models in the future that will really excite you. Now, John Sharkey is a clinical anatomist, exercise physiologist. He's an educator and a thinker of rare precision. And together in concert with a wider community of practitioners, he brought this principle into the clinic, the classroom, and the movement studio. He's given it the actual application that practitioners can use to help themselves and those they work with to move better. He's created FasciaIntegrity. That word, FasciaIntegrity, is one that John and I coined in a conversation together, somewhat tongue-in-cheek. It was to answer a question we kept being asked. How does fascia relate to the tensegrity principle? And the answer, it turns out, is completely, 100% at all times. Fascia forms and abides relentlessly by the rules of tension compression organisation. It always has. FasciaIntegrity is simply the name we gave to something the body was already doing. And please note, I deliberately do not say tension and compression, because that sounds like two separate things. They're never, ever, ever separate forces in living creatures in nature. Never. Each episode in this series is built around a person, their story, their discovery, their moment of seeing. And we'll spend time with their ideas, but we will also spend time with who they were, because the how of discovery matters as much as the what. Breakthroughs don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in a particular life at a particular moment for reasons that are often as human as they are scientific. And they can also be as magical as they are mysterious and as meaningful as they possibly can be, just because of those stories. Just to finish up, I'd like to add something about my own position in this. I've been working in this field for more than 20 years. In some ways, more than 40, although I didn't know I was working in a liquid crystal matrix as a chocolatier. I just made chocolates. And in some ways, more than 60 years, as I also didn't know when my mother was teaching me about fabric since I was born, and my father was teaching me about engineering principles, that they were kind of preparing me in every sense for the questions I pursue now. I've had the great privilege of being trained in human dissection. I've spent hundreds of hours at the anatomical laboratory with John Sharkey and others, and written about these principles in published peer-reviewed work. I'm not an observer of this story. I am, in a small but very genuine way, part of it. And I say that not to claim more than is mine, but because I think you deserve to know that the quality of the questions we're considering together and the stories that we're telling and the detail from the weave of the tapestry you're looking at is really valuable, and it really is for everyone. You know, when a stunning piece of music is enjoyed, it actually takes a village. Every musician, as well as the composer, the conductor, the acoustics of the architecture, where it's played, it takes an orchestra. And I would love for you to enjoy this fully. And I have earned what I'm about to share with you. And so have the people I'm going to introduce you to. And one final thing before we begin their stories. You may remember that I closed series 1 with the image of the spiral, the way each revolution of a spiral is recognizably related to the one before, but at a different level. Like each spiral contains what came before and at the same time moves beyond it. That is exactly what series 2 in this sacred geometry set of series is. Not a repetition of series 1 at a different level of complexity, but actually the next revolution of the same spiral. The shapes were kind of like the grammar in a way. And these people are the ones who learn to speak it fluently in their various languages and learned to use it so that we can. I can't wait to see you in episode 2. God bless.